Good morning, everyone. So, officially, welcome to February's free webinar. This month, we're going back to doing an HR spotlight, and we are focusing specifically on building future ready HR skills. As we all know, change is happening all around us. And I don't know about you, but it's very hard to keep up sometimes. So we like to start the year by looking at what's the research saying, what are some of the newer trends that are popping up, so that these can guide our decisions, especially the skills that we will want to build as HR professionals. So let's do all of that together this morning. But first, let me introduce myself. Can you let me know, please? Give me a thumbs up if this is your first time doing a webinar with us. Let's see. Okay. I do see some people who are here for the first time. It's nice to meet you all. You can call me Elisha. No need for ma'am, just Elisha is okay. So I have a consulting practice. It's called very creatively just my name, Elisha Corpus Consulting. What we do is we focus on culture transformation, leadership development, and diversity, equity, and inclusion. I work with different organizations from very small companies to multinationals and even companies outside of the Philippines. So that's the quick intro on me. When I think about how I started with my consulting practice, one of the biggest things that I did is during the very beginning of the pandemic, very early on, I created a series of free webinars on working virtually. If you can remember, the lockdown was March 15, 2020. So 3 days after that, March 18, we had our first webinar that we just opened to anyone, any HR professional, any leader who would want to learn more about how to do this kind of work arrangement. If we think about it, at that time, it was very new to people here in the Philippines. I was quite lucky because I used to work in Microsoft in their headquarters in Seattle, Washington. Because of that work, I was very used to virtual arrangements, hybrid training. So when I came home to the Philippines in 2019, I noticed that it wasn't something people were used to. Then the pandemic happened and we had no choice. We had to get used to these technologies, to using these platforms. If we think about that as an example, nowadays, something that new is so usual to us, right? Ang dali-dali na mag-Zoom. Sanay na tayong gamitin yung mga virtual tools to work from home or work from anywhere even. So that's just an example of a change that was so different in the beginning, but has now become quite normal in the way that we work. So let me ask you here in the chat box. What about for you? What are some examples of recent changes, maybe from the past 5 years, that are now quite common in the workplace based on your observation? Let me know in the chat, maybe one word or one phrase. Ano yung mga bagay na siguro 5 years ago parang, ano ba to? Bagong-bago. Pero ngayon, kayang-kaya na dahil alam na natin lahat paano gawin, or it's something that's so usual in our everyday. Yeah, okay, HRIS systems, that's very true. Even very small companies nowadays, sometimes less than 20 employees, they're also using these kinds of HRIS systems already. Online transactions, exactly. Here in Quezon City, right, I'm in Quezon City. So the way we apply for like our business permits, for example, most of it is online already. What other examples? using Google Forms. Yeah, I can imagine maybe 5 years ago, it was only students who would use Google Forms and other Google tools, right? But now everyone uses it so easily. Mm-hmm. Hybrid or work from home setup. During the pandemic, everyone thought it wasn't doable, right? But companies proved themselves wrong. And now it's very doable. Mhm. Some automation, some AI, exactly. All right. So there are many things that were new 5 years ago, but are now quite commonplace. So that's what we want to dig into for this morning session. Of course, the first goal of this morning is to understand what are those workplace trends that we have to pay attention to. Some of the examples that you mentioned in the chat, like hybrid setup, using social media platforms for different HR functions, paperless transactions, some of these examples are already those trends that we have to pay attention to. But what else? What else is happening in the workplace that we need to know as HR professionals? Our second objective that we want to get done this morning is to figure out what do we need to prioritize as HR so we can guide our organizations to thrive in this new world of work. As things change, things will get harder for our organizations. So as HR people, we have to figure out how to support those transitions. And then, of course, our third goal is to think about how can we leverage the resources that are available for us so we can become more effective in our HR practice. We will spend a lot of time in that third objective. We'll do some demos. Let's see like how familiar we are with very easy AI tools like ChatGPT. Maybe let's talk about some use cases so we can develop that skill together. These are the three things that we are going to do. So with that, everyone, before we jump into our very first objective, give me a reaction, whatever reaction button you want. So I know that you're ready to start. Let's see. Great, great. Okay. So good to see that you're all engaged. Let's keep that going as we go through our session. So, a lot of you have been going to these monthly free webinars with me. But if you were here last year in January 2024, if you can remember, our topic was pretty similar. We talked about some insights that we have to think about as we make our HR programs for 2024. So balikan natin ng konti. So throwback Wednesday tayo ng konti. Last year, in January, according to the research, these are the things that we will expect from the year. What they said is internal and external pressures are creating a lot of stress for organizations. These are factors that are contributing to the pressures that people are feeling. So, what are some of those pressures? Internally, there seems to be a stagnation of innovation, even if we have a lot of technological advances. If you think about 2024, last year was really the year when people realized that AI is here. It's not anymore something that we talk about for the future. It's not anymore something that only scientists or engineers can use. ChatGPT was something that became free to use for all. So we started realizing that ito na yun. Pwede nang gamitin. The advances that we thought would come in the future, they're here now. However, because people were still adjusting to it last year, it seems like we weren't using it enough to actually be creative and to innovate. some of the notable data points from last year. 64% of the people surveyed, they said that they do not have enough time to finish their work, they don't have enough energy, and they struggle with innovation and strategic thinking. In the Philippines, according to the data gathered by Microsoft in their research, around 72% of people have a hard time doing their work, and they are 5 times more likely to struggle with innovation and strategic thinking. So, what we can see from that is even though the technology is available, people are not maximizing it or utilizing it to its full potential. So, that's some of the internal struggles that we faced last year. Another example of an internal struggle would be the shifting mindsets and values. Last year, according to Deloitte's annual survey on Gen Zs and millennials, the shift in values is steadily rising, especially in that generation, millennials and Gen Zs. If you think about the majority of today's workforce, it's already the millennials that make that up. That's why it's important to see what trends are popping up in that space. So, one of the things that's steadily rising is the belief that companies have to be socially aware and have to make actions that are socially positively impactful. People are becoming more vocal about that, and that's just one example of the shifting mindsets and values. So, those are some of the internal factors creating pressures in organizations. Externally, we know last year we had a lot of geopolitical upheavals, not just here in the Philippines, but everywhere in the world. We also know that there's a glaring need for action on environmental issues. Lots of flooding, wildfires happened last year, and even just early this year. So, really, people are paying attention to the importance of environmental issues. These are some of the things that last year in January of 2024, the research predicted that these are the trends that will affect the workplace for the year. Now, I want to ask all of you, what do you think? You can give me a quick yes or no in the chat box there. Do you think these are still applicable for 2025? Nangyayari at mangyayari pa ba itong mga to for 2025? What do you think? Yeah, overwhelmingly yes. So, yes, these are things that are still very, very much relevant for 2025. But what we have to think about is this year, these trends are not just quote unquote trends. They will become the norm. So think about it as trends, di ba? Parang ang trends is ano lang yung nauuso, ano yung napapag-usapan for now, pero makakalimutan din. Di ba? Parang TikTok, di ba? Ngayon, what people are saying is sobrang Latina or sumasukses tayo lahat. So those are trends because in 5 months, there's a different joke that people will be talking about. What the research says is AI, well-being in the workplace, online work, work from anywhere. These are not trends anymore. They are normal now. Mainstream na sila. So in 5 months, people will not forget about it. And these will become even more embedded in the way that we work. So let's think about that. What will that look like if these trends are now norms? Let's go through it. I have 3 different categories that we will talk about so we can see how these practices can be tangible in the workplace. So let's start with people first, okay? What will the workplace look like in terms of people practices? First, we know that skills must take the spotlight. What do we mean by that? If you think of, for example, the way we recruit, maybe 5 years ago or more, we would usually prioritize, did you go to college for the same degree that you're applying for? Do you have work experience in the same industry that you're applying for? These were usually the things that weighed more for recruitment before. Nowadays, though, more and more organizations are realizing that it's actually skills that can tell them if a person is fit for a role or not. So many people are taking skills outside of what they learned in college or taking up skills outside of their usual jobs. So, for example, a person who did not graduate with a data science degree could take a course on data science and maybe change career directions to do that role instead. Maybe people who are psychology graduates can jump into marketing or market research if they have the skills that are fundamental for market research. So nowadays, companies are seeing that it's the skills that are important. Ang labanan dito is ano ang kaya mong gawin at kaya mong matutunan. So what the World Economic Forum says is, in 2025, it seems like 85% of companies plan to invest in employee training to close skill gaps. This means that the importance of training is increasingly being seen by leaders and by organizations. If your organization doesn't do it, if your organization ignores reskilling or upskilling your employees, you could be left behind by your competitors or by other people in other industries who could poach your talent. So the World Economic Forum research is pretty good because they surveyed 1,043 companies with a lot of employees. So roughly, part of that survey's data would be 14.1 million employees worldwide. So it's a very good data set to get a sense of what is happening in businesses, companies, organizations around the world. So again, one of the first things we have to think about is that skills are so much more important this year and for the future. And if your company doesn't invest in skills, you could potentially be left behind by 85% of other companies who are going to invest in training. So that's the first practice that we have to think about in terms of people. Next, well-being and health are non-negotiables. How do you say that? So Microsoft and LinkedIn, every year, they release a research called the Work Trends Index. The good thing about this study is they survey many different countries, the Philippines included. So for the last year's survey, they looked at 31,000 full-time employees across 31 different countries. What they found was that 68% of people say that they struggle with the pace and volume of work, and 46% of people feel burned out. That's a pretty big chunk of your workforce if you think about it. I won't ask you na if nakarelate kayo dyan, but for sure, I sometimes also feel like it's overwhelming to deal with the pace of work and just the volume of the things that we have to do. So that's a very valid experience, it seems like. But if we dig into other data around health and well-being, it also seems like companies are moving in the right direction. According to Deloitte's study with around 23,000 respondents from 44 countries, It seems like the millennials and Gen Zs they surveyed, they are seeing positive signs that companies are doing the right thing for mental health and well being. What does that mean? It could mean that they're starting to see tangible programs on health and well being. It's also managers and leaders are being more understanding, being more open to conversations. It could also mean the destigmatization of topics like mental health in the workplace. So these are things that we're seeing happening. Of course, it's not perfect. Ideally, more companies are more open to well being and health, but it seems like more and more organizations are going in the right direction. So, again, the message here is our companies have to keep up or do even better so that we're not left behind by those companies that are pushing for health and well being in their workforce. The third practice that we want to look at in terms of people would be societal impact and purpose alignment being part of everyday work. We've heard about purpose and impact so many times already, especially during the pandemic. But nowadays, it's really not a trend anymore. It's something that people expect in their jobs. These are conversations that people want to hear in their everyday work. In that same Deloitte survey that I mentioned earlier, 9 in 10 Gen Zs and millennials, they say that having a sense of purpose is important for job satisfaction. 6 in 10 Gen Zs and millennials, they believe that businesses have such a huge opportunity to make a positive impact on different societal challenges. So this means that we want our companies to do something, to take a stand, to take part in making proactive changes. And that's not going to go away anytime soon. So, again, everyone, if we think about people related practices, these are the three things that used to be trends, but now are normal. And companies are working on it actively. That's the biggest change that I hope you're starting to see. In the past years, it was just awareness. Companies were just saying, yes, this is important, but not really acting on it yet. Nowadays, it seems like more and more companies are actually taking steps, making programs, having systems and processes to address these things. So that's the big difference of what's happening this year. Okay? So that's in terms of people. Before we continue, let me just do a quick check. Are there any questions or clarifications on the people part here before we jump into our next category? Give me a thumbs up if you're all good. Okay, perfect. Later on, I'm sure you'll have more questions and I'll have more questions for you as well. But it's important for us to go through these practices first so that we have the same grounding on the data. All right. So now let's move into our next category, which is tools. What is happening in the workplace in terms of the tools that we can use? What we can see is that there is a high curiosity and willingness from employees to use new tools. In the past, there was a lot of apprehensiveness, uncertainty, even anxiety around AI and other newer tools in the workplace. Dati nga, mag-online transaction pa lang, takot na tayo, di ba? Kinakabahan tayo. But what we're seeing these days is that 75% of employees, they say that they already use AI at work in different ways. Maybe something as simple as asking Microsoft Edge Copilot a question, something as simple as scheduling, or using insights that pop up in your email. It could be that simple, but 75% of employees, they say they are already doing it and using it. They also report that using AI saves them approximately 30 minutes per day. And one of the more interesting things here is 46% of the people who were surveyed, they said that they only started 6 months before the survey was given to them. So what does that tell us? It tells us that this is quite new for a lot of employees, but a lot of them have shown the willingness and the curiosity to try it out, even if it's so new. So that's one of the things happening in terms of the tools that are available for us. Next up, even employees are already willing and some are using the tools, we know that these are not yet maximized to the full potential of what these tools can do. For me, this data point is one of the most interesting ones that I learned recently. What this study from Microsoft's Work Trend Index says is that 52% of employees who use AI are reluctant to admit that they are using it. What does that mean? It means that for those people who say they use AI at work, 52%, so that's a bit more than half, they don't actually tell anyone else that they are using AI. They don't tell their colleagues, they don't tell their boss, they just keep it to themselves. So for me, that's very interesting. I wonder, what do you all think? Why would people be reluctant to admit that they use AI? Maybe type it in the chat. Why do you think? Like, what's the reasoning behind that they don't admit it? Maybe, yeah, maybe they're embarrassed because if you admit to using AI, people might say you're not knowledgeable enough or you're not smart enough. You don't know the answer. They want people to think that they are intellectually capable. They want to get the credit for the work that they do. Yeah, they don't want people to say they're lazy. Sometimes it feels like cheating. You're right. Because the answer can pop up in front of you and you just typed your question. So these are all very, very valid worries. But nowadays, we have to challenge that mindset because these tools are available for us. So, what we need to do is to think about how can we utilize these tools to help us and to make our work better? How can we, in a way, destigmatize these beliefs that we are cheating when we use tools or that we're lazy or less knowledgeable if we use AI? If we stay in that mindset of thinking that para sa hindi magaling lang yan, then we're not going to be able to use these tools in the right way. So we have to start questioning that mindset as well so we can utilize these to their full potential. So good. For me, that was a very interesting data point. I hope you also thought that was interesting and you can share that with your colleagues later on. And then last is if we look at the way organizations and leaders use these tools, it seems like they still need to provide more support around it. What do we mean by that? According to this study by McKinsey, they surveyed 3,613 employees and around 300 executives from different countries. What they found was that employees are actually 3 times more likely to be using new technology than their leaders expect. Meaning, employees are already doing it, but leaders don't think that employees are ready for it or that employees want to do it. So it seems like employees are actually more ready than the leaders. We have to think about that disconnect because if leaders do not have a perception that employees are capable of using tools, then they will not invest in it. So we have to find a way to marry that disconnect in one way or another. Another thing that they found in their survey was that half of the employees they asked, they actually want more formal training. Employees who use AI at work, they just do it like an experiment. A lot of them say they don't actually have a framework on how to use it. They're kind of just trial and error, doing trial and error as they go along. But they would like more support from their organizations so they can test things out in a more strategic or in a more intentional way. According to the people that McKinsey surveyed, employees actually want to join maybe pilot studies, some experiments to see how these new technologies can be implemented in their workplace. So these are the 3 practices that we can expect in our workplaces in terms of tools. Again, the main message here is the technologies that we talked about before that will come in the future. This is it. This is really it. This is the future already, and these technologies are part of the workforce. Now, the question is, how will we use it? How will we support people to really maximize their full potential using these tools? So let's move into the last category of the practices that we're going to look at. Okay. So before we move into that, I got a direct message that I think is really interesting. So let's get into it. So one of your classmates said, the thing is, some managers may not be impressed and are judgmental when staff are using AI when working on tasks. And it fosters a fear of getting canceled when you use these tools. That's very true and very valid. So thank you so much for sharing that. I'm sure you're not the only one experiencing that. This is why it's so important that we, number one, we create an awareness on what these tools are about. A lot of people in higher up positions, as you can imagine, to put it bluntly, they're older na, di ba? They grew up, their generation didn't really have a lot of these new tools, new technology. So maybe they're adjusting to it. So if they think that it's cheating to use AI, you can see where they might be coming from because that's very new to them. That's why, number one, we have to be really good at creating awareness and explaining what these tools are about. And then, number two, as HR professionals, we have to make sure that we're using these tools in the right way, that we're really utilizing them in ways that enhance our work instead of doing our work for us. So later on, for sure, we're going to do some practices there to address that. Yep, I got another question. Yes, AI is a learning tool that we can use as we do the work, and we'll do some examples later. So good, everyone. Thank you for typing it in the chat. Feel free to do that. Send it to me directly or send it to everyone. But it's good if we have your questions as we go through the slides. All right. So let's go into the next category so we can jump into our practice in a bit. So our third category of the practices we want to look at would be around systems and processes. If we look at the systems and processes or the way that businesses operate, the way they structure work, it seems like there's an increased and even more pronounced demand for flexible work arrangements. The data, though, is kind of mixed. So let's get into it. This is the same Deloitte survey that we talked about earlier. So if you look at the people they surveyed, they asked those who returned to office. I'm sure some of you also had a return to office mandate where it became a rule or a policy that you will have to return to in person work in your physical office. It seems like the results are mixed. There are people who said, yes, this works for me. I feel more engaged. I feel more connected. I feel like I can concentrate better in my work. And then there are some people who said, no, this does not work for me. I do not like going to the office. I cannot work here. I can work better when I'm at home. Very mixed when it comes to the results. But what is that telling us? What that tells us is, at the end of the day, flexibility is what continues to be important. There are some people who will prefer to go to the office. There are some people who will prefer to do their work at home. There are some people who will say, it depends. When I'm concentrating on doing something, I want to be at home. When I want to have a brainstorming session with my team, I want to be in the office. So it really depends. The main message there is flexibility is what we have to practice as organizations. How are we making our policies and our systems flexible enough so that people can decide on how they want to work, when they need to work, on specific things they need to do? So that's the main message that we're getting from that. Another thing that we have to think about is that ESG, if you think of ESG, part of that is sustainability, also DEI practices around diversity, equity, inclusion. These are practices that are expected to be part of business strategy, core business strategies, even though there are political disruptions. So let's talk a little bit about that. If you look at the World Economic Forum's study, for the first time ever, environmental stewardship is now in the list of the 10 fastest growing skills. So what does that mean? It means that companies are looking for people who are aware of how they will responsibly use and protect the environmental resources in the roles that they're in. So, for example, instead of just getting an engineer with general engineering skills, maybe people will want to know, okay, like how are you applying engineering into making sustainable practices? How are you applying engineering into making sure our company doesn't pollute the environment or community around us? So that's what we mean by environmental stewardship as a skill. So there's a quick question here. I forgot to mention ESG stands for environmental, social, and governance. So what that means is in companies, these are usually a set of factors that they look at and they measure to know how well their company is doing in terms of environmental sustainability, in terms of their impact in society, and then in terms of how well they're following government standards. Yeah? Okay. So, ESG, again, you can think of it as sustainability. DEI practices can also go under ESG. So, environmental stewardship, it's a skill that's becoming more and more needed by organizations. And then another thing to think about is this issue around DEI. If you think of what's happening in the US, they have a lot going on there, right? The government, their new president, really said that they have to roll back on DEI initiatives. in the US federal offices, for example, they defunded or they took out their initiatives on diversity, equity, and inclusion. They're literally saying anything with the words diversity, equity, inclusion are out. We're not doing those projects. What does that mean? We know that if something is happening in the big companies outside of the Philippines, sometimes these things trickle down into the companies here. We have a lot of multinationals. We have multinationals whose headquarters are in the US. So we cannot avoid that maybe some of those practices could trickle down here. But what does that mean for us? Something to think about here is even if DEI is being affected in the US, it's not going away for a lot of companies. What they're doing is rebranding it. So for some companies, instead of calling their projects DEI projects, they would say something like creating a sense of belonging. They would say something like inclusion, or they find other words to describe it. And what that means for us is we shouldn't stop paying attention to DEI. It's still there, it's still important, and it's still something that we have to work on. So again, these are just some of the things that we have to think about in terms of the way organizations work. Flexible arrangements, ESG, sustainability, DEI, these will continually be part of systems and processes that we have to grapple with in our organizations. All right, everyone. So take a quick breath. We looked at 3 different categories of practices: people, tools, systems, and processes. Now that we've looked at these things that could happen in our workplace 2025 and beyond, let me know, how do you feel about the current state of the workplace after seeing the research? One word or one phrase. Are you excited about the changes? Overwhelmed? Nonchalant? Or chalant? What are you feeling? Yeah, it's incredible, right? Like just so many changes happening. It could be motivating as well. It's nice to see how progressive things are. Could be amazing, challenging, overwhelmed. Yes. I also feel overwhelmed sometimes just thinking about how to marry all these concepts together. Yeah, pressure also. Sometimes it's good then, diba? A little bit of pressure to get us moving. Yeah, excited, challenge, lots of room for improvement. So great, everyone. I'm glad that it's making you feel something because as HR professionals, a lot of these things will actually fall on our laps to guide our organizations through them. So now, let's transition into our second goal. What do we do, di ba? Paano ba to as HR people? Ang daming kailangan isipin. Paano ko to even make sense in my head? So here's how we can think about it. Work in 2025 and beyond, we talked about what's going to happen in terms of people, practices, tools and technology, systems and processes. If we look into having the right tools and technology and the right systems and processes, that can create a lot of efficiencies in your organization. We want to have good technology, good tools, sound systems and processes so we can work faster, so that our organizations can do more in a shorter amount of time. We need to be efficient because things move fast. If we look at having people who use the right tools, when we can create that kind of environment, we are making our workplace more effective. So when people are using the right technologies with the right outcomes, they become more effective in their work. Effective and efficient, that's different. Efficiency is more about the speed with which someone does something. Effectiveness goes beyond just being efficient. It's really about the most quality work, doing what needs to get done in the best, most optimal way possible while still being efficient. So that's the kind of environment we want to get to, that people can be effective through the tools that they use. And of course, if you support people with the right systems and processes, you're creating an equitable environment. We need systems and processes because these become rules, policies that will decide how people will behave, how people will interact with each other in the organization. We need that to be sound so that our organizations can be an equitable place for people of diverse backgrounds, diverse situations. If we think about all of that, they need to work together. Hindi pwedeng, imagine this, hindi pwedeng maganda lang yung tools mo, pero yung mga tao mo hindi marunong gamitin. You're not going to achieve an effective organization. Hindi pwedeng may systems and processes ka nga, pero wala ka namang tools to implement that and make that work. You're not going to have an efficient workplace. Hindi rin pwede na sabihin mo lang, mabait na yung mga tao ko. They're going to be inclusive. We have to make sure that we have policies, systems, and processes in place so that we have sustainable equity in our organizations. They all have to work together so that ultimately we can create a workplace with a culture of high performance, inclusion, and sustainability. What we have here in the middle, that's the goal. That's the kind of workplace that will allow our organizations to thrive in 2025 and even beyond 2025. So now, what does HR need to do? Our role as HR is to equip and enable our organizations to play in the intersections. What do we mean by that? If you see the intersections of all of these circles, that's where we play as HR. We have to make sure that we can create effectiveness, efficiency, and equity in our organizations through getting the right people, developing them, making sure we're involved in choosing tools and technology that will serve people in the right way. We have to make sure that we weigh in on decisions around systems and processes so we can continue making those good for the employees and the communities that are affected by our businesses. So that's really the role that we play. We ensure effectiveness, efficiency, and equity so we can create a culture of high performance, inclusion, and sustainability. If we summarize all of that, HR's role in the new workplace is number one, to advocate for human-centeredness. People pa rin, di ba? What we know in organizations is that nowadays, human-centeredness is so important. If you just focus on tools, you can be pwedeng advanced yung technology, but who is going to use those tools? You need people who are going to support that and be supported by that. So as HR, we have to bring in that people perspective. That's why we're human resources. Number two, we have to support leaders and employees. We have to help them to refocus on what is our mission? What is our vision? What are our goals? Ano bang ginagawa natin dito? Bakit ba natin to ginagawa? Ano bang significance ng company natin, ng products natin, ng services natin? We have to always reorient people towards that North Star. We also have to help people to prioritize their work accordingly. We have to make sure that departments are not working in silos, people are talking to each other, people are aligned in the work that they do. And then number three, we have to upskill ourselves in the way that we gather, make sense of, and integrate data into actionable insights. A lot of you said earlier that it's a bit overwhelming because there are so many things happening in the workplace, in our industries, in the world in general, and we have to make sense of all of that. So we have to find a way to upskill ourselves so that we can use the information we have and make it into the most actionable insights that will benefit our organizations. So let me stop here for a bit. I'd love to ask all of you, if you look at numbers 1, 2, 3 here, which one do you personally find most intriguing or most exciting to play that role as an HR person in your organizations? And then while people are typing, feel free to take a screenshot. Someone asked me earlier if it's okay to take a screenshot. Yes, of course, take a screenshot. And also, we share the recording via YouTube link, so you can go back to that later on. All right, let's see here. A lot of people are saying too. And that's good, right? Because if I think about it, number one, medyo given dapat, di ba, na we're advocating for human-centeredness. Number two is one of the fundamental things that HR will have to do. Even if you think about the workplace 10, 20, 30 years ago, yan na yun eh. Importante na rin yan na ginagawa natin as HR. If we look at number three, though, that's a little bit newer and a little bit more nuanced these days. These days, we have so many things that we can work with. And so we have to be even better and step up even more in terms of using data. So that's what we're actually going to do in our last part of our session. We're going to look at how can we leverage resources that are available for us, like AI, for example, to be more effective HR practitioners? So let's see here. Have you heard of this term? I'm sure, diba? Work smart, not hard. But for me, I think it's more appropriate these days if we say work smart by making your tools work hard. So we have to make use of what's available to us. Before we jump into our next part, we'll do some practice. Can I get a quick thumbs up? So let's see here. Give me a thumbs up if you've already experimented with AI tools like ChatGPT, whatever else that you can think of. Even the image generators, and even just a little bit of experimentation. Kahit inopen nyo lang yung website, okay lang yun. I just want to get a sense of how familiar people are. Okay, so it seems like a pretty good number of you are familiar. What we're going to do in this portion is we'll talk about how do we prompt these tools in HR specific situations. We'll give some examples so that we can use it in our work. So let's look into ways to maximize tools and technology. First up, we can use it to brainstorm. I don't know about you, but sometimes when I'm working on HR projects, it could be so wide. It's wide because we're working with people. To put it bluntly, we're working on people. Kasi pag HR ka, mga tao yung participants mo, di ba? So there could be like such a range of possibilities. Sometimes it's nice to just have a sounding board where you can throw your ideas and they can help evaluate those ideas for you. That's one of the ways you can use technology by brainstorming with it. You can also, of course, use it for gathering data, synthesizing data. I think these are the most common use cases for AI. You could use it to seek inspiration. Sometimes we run into creative blocks where we have constraints, but we don't know how to get out of those constraints. So we can use technology to help with that, to help prompt us so we can be more creative. And then also, I think this is one that I don't see a lot of people using. We can use technology to evaluate our work. We can use it to see if our work is something that is credible, passable, acceptable, or if there are things we can do to make it better. Yeah, and someone said in the chat as well, they've used AI to compose their responses to make sure it's professional or that the tone is quite nice when they send it out. So that's a very good use case as an example. No matter the way that we use AI and different technologies, what I hope we can start to advocate for is think of technology as your support and not your servant. Let's dig into that a little bit. A lot of people might think that it's lazy to use AI because it gives you answers right away. But if we go beyond that, we want to also be critical about how we prompt it to give us quality answers. That's why it's a support that helps us instead of a servant who just does what we ask it to. I hope you see the difference there. If we think of technology as our servant, we just tell it what to do and expect it to be correct all the time. We just expect it to do everything we say without thinking. But if it's a support, then that means we're using it with a more critical lens. We're using it to actually enhance our work and not to do our work for us. So with that, everyone, let's practice a little bit, okay? So for example, let's say that you are in HR, okay? Like most of us here. One day, our boss, who is a senior leader in the company, tells us that the company needs to be more prepared for the future of work. They are telling us that we need to develop a training curriculum to equip the employees for that future. So let's try to work smart by making our tools work hard. Let me ask you first. Let's say, for example, we go to Chat GPT. What is an example of a prompt or what question would you ask first if this is the kind of task given to you? So anything that comes to mind for you. What's an example prompt or question that you think you would want to ask ChatGPT? Type it in the chat box here. And I'll give you a few seconds to think. Think of some questions going through your mind if you're given a task like this. So siguro pwedeng, oh, what is the future of work, diba? Ano pa? How do you make a training curriculum? What else? So some examples here. What are the things in the future that that are needed by employees? Good, good. Ano pa? What other example questions are going through your head when you're given a prompt like this by your boss? Yeah, what do I need to prepare a program plan? What else? Diba? If your boss tells you one day, HR, you make a training curriculum. Yeah, okay. What is the future of the workplace like? Possible training providers. What's the content of a training curriculum? Exactly. Okay. So good, everyone. But since we're challenging ourselves to use our tools in a more effective way, diba? We are going to work smart by making our tools work hard. There are some tips that we can use so we can be more effective as we prompt our AI or our chat GPT. So I'll give you an example. Context is very, very important. So instead of just typing in chat GPT, please give me a training curriculum that covers the future of work. It's better if you give the context. Who are you? What is your role? What are you doing this for? Okay. What is the goal of what you're trying to ask? So I already have an example that I typed here. To set the context, you can say something like, I'm an HR professional. Our company is a medium-sized company. I'm in the Philippines. We have 100 employees. You can talk about your industry. You can say, I'm in the service industry, manufacturing, FMCG, food, whatever. So the more detail you can give, the better. You can talk about the task. I was given a task to design a training curriculum for employees and leaders at different levels. We want to ensure they are ready for the future of work. What you want to do first is to get as much research and information as possible. So, my advice is don't jump immediately into give me a training curriculum. Why is that? Because you need to make sure that only the most credible and reliable data sources are used. So, this is where your critical thinking comes into play, right? You also want to make sure that you know the research behind the information. So, what would be good is you can ask first, I want to make sure that I want a research based approach. Give me credible sources of information. So then that's what the chat gave me. So these are some credible sources of information. And actually, these are the ones that I've been talking about earlier. So, di ba, kita natin, ito yung mga consulting firms and organizations that have good, robust data that we can use. Now, a couple of different ways you can proceed. Actually, what you can do is you can say, for example, interesting yung number 1, yung sa World Economic Forum. So what you can say is, please give me a summary of the first resource from WEF. Provide the summary in bullet points. Okay, so you can say that, right? And now, what it's going to do is to provide you a summary of the report. And that's okay. But to take it further so we can really utilize this in the best way, my advice is read the summary, then read the full report. So bakit important yun? Because as HR people, this kind of information is good to have in our back pocket. It's good for us to understand better saan nanggagaling yung data, bakit nila sinabi yun, and to have a deep understanding of it so we can explain it to our leaders. I use these summaries from ChatGPT to help me orient my learning. So what I do is I'll read the summary first so I have a high level understanding. So when I get to the actual research, it's easier for me to remember things because now I have a structure in my head of what is this research about and what are the important information that I can use to support the summary that I read. Okay? So that's another way that we can use our tools to be more effective as HR practitioners. Next up, so now you have your data from the research. What did we say? We have to advocate for human-centeredness, which means that we should not lose the perspective of our employees. So now, for example, let's say I want to conduct some interviews and focus group discussions of employees. What I can do is I can ask for help to make that guide so I can have some questions. So, for example, I can say, I want to collect qualitative, meaning narrative data from employees and leaders. Please provide some guide questions that I can ask employees and leaders. Then you can be as specific as possible. You can say, provide 2 sets of guide questions. One for employees, one for leaders. Then it'll generate that for you, okay? Now, at least you have some basis to start with. But again, my advice is we think critically. So what we do is we read through the questions, then we have to ask ourselves, is this what I want to find out from the people I'm going to interview and talk to? What kind of answers will be most helpful for me so I can ultimately create my training plan? Are these appropriate for the people in my company? Then you can adjust and revise as you see fit. But again, this is helpful because now you have a draft that you can start with. So very easy, di ba? Meron na agad tayong sample questions that we can use. Now, when we do this with employees, that's where our critical thinking will come into play. We have to make sure that we understand why we're asking these questions so we can probe, ask follow-up questions, and really dig into their perspectives and their experiences. So that's another way we can use our tools. Now, for example, if we already have done the interview or the focus group discussion, so what I've done, just as an example here, I have let me just open my data set. So this is the only drawback of running all of these chat GPTs and Zooms all at once. Medyo bumabagal lang yung computer, but that's okay. Nothing we cannot fix. All right. So let's say, for example, you've done your interview, you've done your focus group discussion. What I have here is a pretend transcript of a focus group discussion. You can transcribe your conversation so that it'll be easier to synthesize and analyze. Now, if you have your transcription already, what you can do next is you can ask for help synthesizing that. So you can directly upload your document in ChatGPT and say, this is a focus group discussion that I conducted with 3 participants. You can describe the participants. One is an employee, one is a mid-level manager, one is a high-level leader. You can say, please provide the main insights or takeaways from the participants. And now what it will do is it will analyze your transcript to give you the main insights from the focus group discussion. Now, as HR people who are using tools smartly, I will say we don't just stop here. It's good if you think about it on your own as well and just use these as prompts. So for example, if the first main insight is, it seems like for the future of work, there are changing employee expectations. According to the data, your younger employees prioritize mental health and work-life balance. So then you should ask yourself, based on the data that I gathered, based on the things I've read, Why is that? What is the reason for this specific generation to pay attention to that trend or to that practice? So it's really up to you to deepen that. But you use your tools as a way to start giving you a draft, to give you ideas. Okay? So that's one way to do it. Now, for example, after I analyzed the data, after I looked into all of the things that I learned, let's say I'm done creating my training curriculum. So remember, the ultimate goal here is we create a training curriculum that equips our employees for the future of work. So let's say, for example, that's something that I've done already. So I have a suggested training curriculum for mid-level managers, breaking that down into key learning areas, delivery method, and the modules that I'm suggesting. What you can do is you can actually prompt your tool to evaluate your work for you. So I uploaded that training curriculum here. What I can say is, pretend that you are the CEO of the company. You are evaluating my training curriculum. What are some pain points that you think I should pay attention to? So now what it will do is it will tell you what are some of the things that you should address so that your leaders will have more confidence that this is the right direction and this is the way to go. So what we did there is we told the technology what persona or what context to think about, and then we told it to evaluate our work. All right? Everyone, those are just very, very quick examples of how we can use the tools to work hard so that we can work smart, okay? To summarize all of the things that we talked about, we explain the context. Again, you describe your role, you describe your company, describe your industry, describe the goal. What are you doing? Try to create personas to diversify perspectives. You can say, for example, if I were an employee, how would I react to this training curriculum? So you can kind of prompt the tool to give you those different questions so you can also think through different scenarios. Specify the goal or the desired outcome. You just have to make sure that every step of the way, you're reminding the tool what you're doing. So just try to say, again, this is to create a training curriculum, etc., etc. You can play with constraints to encourage creativity. So for example, you can say, we only have a limited time frame of 3 months. How will I do these goals in 3 months' time? So you can ask it those kinds of questions, not because their answer will automatically be correct, but because it will also help you to be more creative and maybe question your own assumptions. Of course, you have to identify the output or the format that you want to see. So tell it if you want bullet points. You can also say, please arrange in a table format. I want to see a comparison. So you can have different prompts so that it will give you the kind of visualization that is most helpful for you. These are just some of the tips on using AI tools. The example we went through, it's about training, but you can really go so many different ways. For example, you can also use it in recruiting. So in this other demo, what I've done is I pasted my LinkedIn profile. Then I asked, what are this person's strengths and what possible roles can they play in an organization given their profile? So that's something you can do if, for example, you have a person who needs coaching on career or a person who wants to switch roles. maybe this is something you can consider asking. Many different things you can do. But again, we have to think critically about what prompt to ask, because that's even more important than the answers. If we give a good prompt, we will get good answers. If we give lazy prompts that are not specific enough, then we will also get lazy answers. That will not help our credibility as HR professionals. So, everyone, as we start wrapping up, maybe think about your own situations in your own teams or your own organization. Is there a problem, a concern, or a task that you are doing or that you will tackle immediately to apply these new strategies? So give me an example of like a task or a project that you're doing now, or maybe you'll do soon in the next few weeks or months, where you can apply using these AI tools and technologies that we just practiced with earlier. So let me know. I'll give you a few seconds to think about that. Social media marketing for recruitment, exactly. So many different ways you can start that, right? Like you can brainstorm first about how to do it, get best practices, or evaluate your own strategies. Program management, especially with maybe creating charts, right, for projects, timelines, coming up with new strategies. Yes. So IDEO. So IDEO is the company that does design thinking. They use design thinking for creative work. I recently took a course with IDEO about AI and design thinking. So what they said is try to talk to your chat GPT or to whatever AI service you're using. Try to talk to it in a creative way. Give it as many like constraints as you can think of. Be playful with it so that it forces the machine to also think and give you more creative prompts. So in turn, you're also kind of forced to be more creative and to be more innovative. All right. So good, everyone. I'm glad you have some examples that you can think of. So with that, let's wrap up by just reviewing what we learned so far from this morning. So this morning, we looked at what is the workplace like in 2025 and beyond. We said that in terms of people practices, there are different things happening around purpose, around impact, health, and well-being as well. We looked at tools and how technology is available but not really maximized yet and supported as much yet. We also talked about how systems and processes are gearing towards really embedding sustainability, embedding DEI into the way of work. So we said that as HR people, we support our organizations to use tools and systems and processes in more efficient ways. We support our people to be more effective as they use those tools, and we make sure that systems and processes create an equitable environment for our people. Ultimately, our role as HR people is to create a culture of high performance, inclusion, and sustainability by making sure that employees and leaders understand that and that we're supporting them so they too can be empowered to contribute to that kind of culture. HR, we equip and enable our organizations to play in those intersections. So it's not just plainly about tools, not just plainly about systems and processes, but it's really the interplay of all of that. So with that, everyone, we have one last question for you. What is the one thing that you will make sure to think about again tonight before going to bed? So what is the one thing you will remember from this morning so you can ruminate about it and reflect about it more later on? Type one word or one phrase in the chat. Okay, innovation, yes, lots of innovation happening. Adaptability, yep, we are required to be very adaptable. What else? What other takeaways will you make sure to think about? Being familiar with AI, yup, just, even very basic ways to use it. Being more creative as we embrace these technologies. Flexible, having a continuous changes that we need to face. Yup. Using AI to enhance our work. So it's our support, right? Not our servant, because it enhances our work. Yes. Great, everyone. So just keep on thinking about that. Like what we always say, it's good to go back to your learnings at the end of the day so that you don't forget it and you're really maximizing what you're learning. Sayang naman, di ba? We're together for an hour and 30 minutes. So, big chunk na rin yon of your day. So it's good if there's some things that you can remember from our time together. And with that, let's wrap up. So here are some reminders for you. So for the people who are new here, we usually finish the reminders first so that people who do not have questions, they can go and have lunch already if they want to. And then for the people with questions, we can stay behind and we can talk about those. All right. So first up, please connect with us on Facebook. We are there as Elisha Corpus Consulting. We will post the recording YouTube link there later on. So make sure to like and follow that page if you want to see that notification. Also, we're just please going to ask if you can leave a review. We would appreciate that greatly if you can tell others about your experience learning with us. Next up, if you need some career tips and advice, you can download the Job Street app. So last year, I shot some videos with them, 4 videos actually, about different things from creating a CV, creating a cover letter, to even creating your resignation letter, if that applies to you. So if that's something that's interesting, it's all free, but you just have to download the Job Street app also for free, and you can see the videos there. So next up, very, very important for today, everyone, please answer the evaluation form and request for a certificate using this link. So the link is now in the chat, or you could also type that in your browser. Again, the form will be open for 2 hours only, and certificates will be given within 1 week. So please expect that by Wednesday next week. And then last, everyone, the link isn't working. Okay, let's see here. Let me refresh that for you, but if not, then no worries. Sometimes Bitly doesn't work, so no worries. Let's just do the direct Google link, everyone. So hold on. Let me grab that for you. So there we go. You can answer the evaluation form using the direct Google link instead. So please try that. Sometimes Bitly isn't working as well, but that's okay. All right, so answer via the Google form. And then also, everyone, please, if you're interested to see how we can work with your organizations, so the free webinars, we just do it once a month, but we do work with different client organizations. So if you're interested about that, you can contact us via our email, and we can start with an introductory call so we can understand your needs, and then we can create a proposal that will cover those needs for you. All right. And then, of course, we'll see you next month, but I'm already telling you now. So next month, we'll do things a little bit differently. I'm going to send a case study about our next topic, and then we'll discuss that case as we go through the free webinar. So it's a little bit of a thinking game that we're going to do, but I hope it's still something that we'll enjoy and learn from, okay? So everyone, just to make sure, please use the Google form link instead of the bit.ly. So let me type that in the chat box. There you go. Okay. Then let me just quickly correct that on the slide so you can have the correct link with you. Okay, there we go. So with that, everyone, that is actually it for today's session. Again, the evaluation form is there in the chat. Click on the Google form link, okay? And if you have questions, feel free to stay behind. But if you do not have any questions, then if you want to go to lunch now, I hope there's an option for you to go to early lunch. That's it for today's session. So it's been great learning with you. Thank you so much for joining us this February. Again, if you have no more questions, feel free to leave the call. But if you have questions, you can type that in the chat and we'll stay behind to answer it. Okay. So everyone, answer the evaluation form using the Google form, or there's a suggestion here about the bit.ly link. You can just look at that in the chat, but if not, just use the Google form para mabilis din for you. Okay. Thank you, everyone. Don't forget the evaluation form. That's something that will be very important, so we will know if you want a certificate or not. Thank you, everyone. So bye to those who do not have any more questions. Thank you all for learning with us. Don't forget your evaluation form and enjoy your lunch and the rest of your February. 2 more days of your February. Thank you, everyone. So don't forget the evaluation form. I'm just getting some questions. So please note, we will only give certificates to those who answer the evaluation form. We sent the link in the chat and we will send those certificates within 1 week. So expect it latest by Wednesday next week. Thank you, everyone. I'm not getting any questions in the chat as well. So if you have questions, feel free to leave it there in the chat. If not, then I'll see you next month. Have a great rest of your February. Don't forget the evaluation. Thank you. And it's always nice getting your insights as well. Thank you for making the chat very much alive all the time. Bye, everyone. So just making sure you all see the evaluation form here. I'm just putting it in the chat. Bye. Have a great rest of your Wednesday. Power up to you all too. Bye, everyone. Have a great day to you as well. Bye-bye.